Masechet Nazir Daf Kaf Dalid. The subject today is what to do with animals that were consecrated for Nazirut sacrifices, but then no longer deemed necessary, either because of annulment, or we'll see other cases because the person died or already used, had other sacrifices that he used. So here we go, Mishnah. Haisha shenadra ben Nazir vifrisha et behemta ve'achar kach hefer la ba'alaha. So a woman takes a vow she's going to be a Nazirah, and she already designated animals for her purification rituals, meaning at the end of for conclusion rituals, 3 animals to use. But in the meantime, she hadn't finished yet her Nizirut period, and her husband heard about it and annulled her Nizirut. So now she doesn't need these animals anymore. So what's going to happen to them? So it depends. If these animals belong to him, to the husband, it's his property, in that case, then you could just return them to the flock, and they'll go and graze and be regular chulin. Eventually, just automatically, they're going to bump into something or get scratched and become blemished. But there's regular kosher animals and you can eat them. They are not consecrated. The reason for this is that because she doesn't own them, I can't go to my friend's house and just consecrate his animal. It doesn't belong to me. And here, the animal does not belong to her, it belongs to the husband, and therefore it's not consecrated. However, v'im shela hayta behema hachata tamut ve'ola tikrab ola. If she does belong to her, she has her own property. The Gemara will explain how she can have her own property, because usually things she acquired goes to her husband, unless the husband specifically gifts it to her. So if it's hers, now, since it's hers, when she consecrates it, it is a consecration. And so therefore, you can't just let them go to chulin. Now there's consecrated animals that cannot be used. Well, let's see how we can use them. Hatat is the most difficult of them, and it has to just die. The reason is because korban hatat you cannot bring in a voluntary way. You can't just say, I feel like bringing a korban hatat, I want to volunteer one. No. If you're obligated to bring one, then you bring it. If you're not obligated, you cannot bring it. Because then you're bringing an animal that is not required to the Bet HaMikdash. So you cannot sacrifice it. You cannot let it become just cholin, and therefore it has to just be left by itself until it dies of its own from deprivation. Sad, but true. And now the olah, that it can be a voluntary offering and will be treated as a regular korban olah. So even though this is one of the animals that a Nazir has to bring, since she is not a Nazir anymore, it's okay. She'll bring the olah as a voluntary olah without any changes. Shelamim, however, is going to be a little different. Tikrab shelamim v'nechalin liyom echad ve'enan teonin lechem. The regular shelamim, which one can bring as a voluntary offering. Anytime you want to bring a shelamim, you can. And the Nazir also brings a shelamim. However, the rules for the shelamim are a little bit different. A shelamim for a Nazir and a voluntary one. One of the differences is how long do you have to eat it. A regular shelamim, you have 2 days and a night. In other words, if I bring a shelamim on Sunday, I can eat the meat, right? The owners can eat the meat, most of it, can eat it all day and at night and all day on Monday until sunset. That's the usual one. However, shelamim for a Nazir can only be eaten for 1 day. That's it. And so this shelamim has the rules of a shelamim for a Nazir in terms of the time period. However, unlike the regular, unlike a shelamim for a Nazir, when a Nazir brings a shelamim, usually he has to bring bread with it, 20 loaves. However, a voluntary shelamim does not bring loaves. So in this sense, it's more like a regular shelamim. So that's the idea. This shelamim, although since it was designated to be a Nazir for a Nazir, so it has the restrictions in terms of time period. But since she is in fact not a Nazirah and just bring it as a voluntary offering, therefore we do not require her to bring the bread. Good. Now the next case is, what about if she designated not an animal itself, but just money? Hayula ma'ot situmin yipelu lindava. If she had a bunch of money, she didn't earmark which coins would be for this animal or for that animal. She just took, let's say each animal is $300. She just took $900. She set it aside, said, I'm going to use this $900 to pay for for all of my offerings. Well, since she doesn't designate which funds are going for which animal, so she can use all of them for voluntary offerings. And none of them were for chatat, so that's fine. However, me'ot meforashin demei hatat yilchu liyam hamelach lo nehenin velo ma'alin bahem. If she did designate that this specific money, this $300 is going to be for korban hatat. So just like with the animal, you have to let it die. So too the coins. What are you going to do? You can't buy a korban hatat and bring it. So what are you going to buy an animal and let it die? No, you take the money and you throw it into the Dead Sea. It will fall to the bottom. No one will ever use it, right? It cannot be used for anything. I wonder if we go scuba dive down the Dead Sea, maybe we'll find a whole pot of coins down there. They'll probably be all rotted away from the salt anyway. Okay, so you cannot benefit from the coins. Although, if someone would benefit from them, they would not violate me'ilah. Me'ilah is when you take a consecrated animal and you use it for your own purpose. In this case, since you cannot use them to buy an animal, so there's no animal here, so if you did use this money for yourself, it's not allowed, but it would not violate me'ilah. Now, demei olah, yaviu olah, u'mo'alin bahen. The money that was designated for korban olah, well, you can bring a voluntary olah, so go buy an olah, and that's a full regular animal, so therefore one would be liable to me'ilah if one used those coins or that animal for themselves. Demei shelamim yaviu shelamim v'nechalin liyom echad ve'en te'onin lechem. The money that was designated for a shelamim, also you can bring a voluntary shelamim, so go buy a shelamim, and it will have the same law as above if one actually designated an animal for shelamim, and then she ended up not being a Nazirah. So you bring it as a shelamim. It is like korban Nazir in the time span, only one day, but it is not like it in that you don't have to bring the 20 loaves as a meal offering alongside it. All right, that's the Mishnah. Now, we want to know the author. We're going to have a couple of different opinions. Mantana de Baal la mishta'abad la. Who is the author that says that a husband is not responsible for providing animals for his wife? In this Mishnah, it seems that there is not a responsibility, because it says if the wife designates her husband's animals, turns out she was not a Nazirah, then it goes back to her husband, right? Because it's not consecrated, because it's her husband's. That means that the husband is not obligated. It's his animal, so she's basically designating animals that aren't hers. Now, in a regular case, let's say she did have to bring a certain korban, so generally the husband is going to provide it. But that providing for her is only assuming that she's actually going to bring it. So if it turns out that she didn't have to bring it, then it's his. So we want to know who is the opinion that would say that a husband is not automatically obligated to give this animal to his wife for her sacrificial needs. Amar Rav Chisda Rabbanan hi. It's got to be Rabbanan. We're going to see the machloka between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. Tisa kadatech Rabbi Yehuda hi amaita sevet tid'ai ba'ayadir ha mishta'abad la. We're going to see the source of the source Braita in a second, where Rabbi Yehuda says that a husband is responsible. Part of the ketubah, he has to give his wife any needs that she has for her sacrificial animals. In that case, since the husband, once she designates something, she needs it. So now the husband is giving it to her. So now it's basically hers. And when she designates it, the consecration takes place. And so then you can't just let it go back into the flock, as the Mishnah said, right? Because he's indebted to her, and so now they're hers. So let's see the machloket. Detanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Adam evi korban ashir al ishto. This is talking about if a husband is rich and the wife, she comes from a poor family, and now she has to bring a korban ole v'yored, like a woman who gives birth. Ole v'yored means if you're rich, you bring an animal. If you're poor, you bring a bird or a meal offering, depending on your status. So although she, and on her own tax return, shows no income, but because she's married to a rich man, so the law is it goes by his tax bracket, not hers, right? This is like, my son who worked in the summer, he has to pay, he's 19, he still has to pay my tax bracket, not his tax bracket, because he's a dependent. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda says that a married woman brings a korban, has to bring korban based on her husband's status. That shows that the husband is responsible for paying for her sacrifices. And Rabbi Yehuda continues and says, "V'chen kol korbanotea she chayevet shekach katav la kol achrayut te'it lich alai min kadmatena." And in fact, or any sacrifice that she has to bring, the husband has to provide for it, as it says in the language of the ketubah, that I accept upon myself the responsibility of all the things that you have from beforehand, and that includes any responsibilities for offerings. Okay, so that's the Rabbi Yehuda. So according to the Rabbi Yehuda, since the husband is responsible to give her any animals that she uses and consecrates, it would already be hers and therefore remain consecrated even when it gets undone. So therefore, this Mishnah can't be Rabbi Yehuda. It must be Rabbanan, because Rabbanan are the ones that say the husband doesn't have to give it to her. And so if she goes and consecrates something, and in the end she does have to bring it, fine, the husband will be fine with that. But if it turns out that she didn't have to bring it, then it never went to her. It was never hers. He never agreed to that. And so it would just go back to his property unconsecrated. All right, that's the opinion of Rav Chisda. However, Rava Amar, afilu tema Rabbi Yehuda, ki mishtabad la b'milata desricha la, b'milata de la sricha la la. Rava says, no, it can be Rabbi Yehuda. When it says that the husband is responsible to give his wife animals, that's only in something that she actually needs, or she's obligated to bring. If she's not obligated, then he says no. And so now, although at first she thought she was obligated and consecrated the animal, since after the husband himself annulled her Nazirut, turns out she was not consecrated, she was not obligated. So this thing that he gave her was only on condition that she needs it. She doesn't need it, goes back to him, and turns out retroactively he never gave it to her. So in fact, for this Mishnah can be Rabbi Yehuda as well. Okay, that's all one version of these two answers. Now we're going to see another version. According to this version, we ask the same question: who's the author of Mishnah? But here, Rav Chisda says the opposite. That in fact, this Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. His reasoning is going to be the equivalent of Rava here. La desricha la di Rabbanan la mishta bad la kelal. This Mishnah has to be Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says a husband is responsible to provide animals for his wife, but that's only something that she needs. So if she needs it, yes, then it's consecrated. But it's not something that she needs. In this case, turns out she was never a Nazirah, so she didn't need it. So the husband never gave it to her, so it was not hers to consecrate. It goes back to him. So the Mishnah fits perfectly with Rabbi Yehuda. It does not work for Rabbanan, because Rabbanan say there is no responsibility, there is no lien or mortgage or anything that the husband would have to give his wife, and therefore, even for Rabbanan, you couldn't explain the regular case of if she remained a Nazirah and she consecrated an animal, that still will not be consecrated, because the husband has no obligation to give her an animal, right? If she asks and says, oh, I have to give this, so they'll figure out a way. Maybe the husband will decide, if he wants to give it to her. But he doesn't have to, and therefore even this Mishnah cannot be Rabbanan, because this Mishnah assumes that if it's not annulled, then it is consecrated automatically. And therefore, the Rav Chisda says this Mishnah is only Rabbi Yehuda, not Rabbanan. So now we ask about this. So in what circumstance would he be responsible for providing her an animal? Well, it'll be, for example, that he actually transfers the animal to her possession. He decides, okay, fine, I'm willing to give this to you. Now, once he gives it to her, then it is fully hers. So in that case, well, the Mishnah already addressed that, because Mishnah says if it's hers, it remains consecrated. And so there would be no case where it's his, but it remains consecrated should she go through the Nazirut. And that's why it can't be, this Mishnah cannot be Rabbanan. It has to be Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, now Rava Amar, afilu tema Rabbanan, ki makne la name b'milata de sricha la, b'milata de la sricha la makne la. And Rava says, I can even be Rabbanan, because according to the rabbis, when a husband transfers, he's willingly transferring this animal to her. He's only transferring it if she needs it. But if she doesn't need it, then he's not transferring it. In other words, the only difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan is whether he's obligated automatically to give it to her, or he decides, oh, you need this expense? Okay, fine, I'll give it to you. And so, therefore, even according to Rabbanan, a husband may very well say, oh, you need an animal for your Nazir sacrifices? Okay, here you go. Here's 3 animals. But even when he's giving it, it's a gift on condition that she actually needs it. And so if it turns out that he annuls it and she doesn't need it, then the gift never happened, and therefore it goes back to him, and they are not consecrated. If she does go ahead as a nizirah, then the gift continues, and that's why they are consecrated. So you know what? We can explain this Mishnah both according to the Yehuda and according to Rabbanan, in the opinion of Rava in the second version. Okay, good. Now, quick question. How can a woman own anything? A wife own anything? If it was her own animals, then if it's a chatat, it has to die. If it's olah, you can bring it as an olah. Where would she get the money from? Right? If she earns money or finds something, it goes to her husband. Whatever the wife acquires goes directly to the property of the husband. Amar Papa, Papa says one option is she saved from her dough. She has a regular allowance of food to eat. She ate a little bit less every day, saved some of that, saved some of her allowance, and then she was able to she keeps, because she gets that allowance. She can do whatever she wants with it. Or a third party can gift it to her on condition that your husband has no right to it. If that kind of gift she can accept and can keep, and it doesn't go to her husband. So those are 2 ways that a wife can have her own property. Next, ha'olah tikrav. Okay, so now we learned that if it is in fact her sacrifice and it's an olah, you make it a regular olah. If it's a shelamim, then it has an in-between status. It's only in for 1 day, like that of a Nazir, but you don't have to bring the 20 loaves like you would for a Nazir. In that sense, it's like a regular voluntary offering. Okay. Amar le Shemuel Abu bar Ihi, la tetib al karech adamat li hadamileta. So Shemuel asked the father of Ihi, don't sit on your feet rather, until you teach me this matter. Sit on your feet means they usually sat on the floor. They sat cross-legged or whatever, or knelt down, and says, I want you to stay standing. I don't want you to relax, because I need to know the answer to this matter, right? I want you to explain this Mishnah. What is going on, right? What cases would this happen in? And so this sounds like the following is the answer. It's a braita that the father of Ihi is going to say, I'll explain to you the whole thing, that there are 4 cases that have the same law. Ve'eluhen arba'a elim she'enan teonin lechem shelo v'shela v'shela achar hamita v'shela achar kapara. There are 4 cases of rams that you bring the ram as a shelamim, but you do not bring the 20 loaves of bread as you usually would for a Nazir. And so what are the 4 cases? His and hers, and one that's after death, and one that's after atonement, meaning the person already had atonement. So let's explain each case. Shela hadamaran. The one of hers, we already explained that. That was our Mishnah. Because she was a Nazirah, her husband annulled it. Now she's not a Nazirah anymore, but these are her animals that she consecrated. They remain consecrated. So the Shalamim is offered as a Shalamim, but not fully like a Nazir, no loaves. Shelo, here's a case of a man where you could have the same case. There's no annulment for a man, but here is a similar case. Titnan, Haish madiret beno ben Nazir, ben Haisha maderet et bena ben Nazir. Gileach o shigilechuhu kerobim, micha o shimichuhu kerobim. Ayu lo ma'ot setomim yipiludin dava. Let's explain the case first here. A father made a vow that his son will be a Nazir. A father has a right to do that. He can say, my son, he's a Nazir. Whereas a mother cannot make pronounce that her son is a Nazir. However, even though a father has a right to initiate it, if the son objects or any of his relatives object, how do you object? Either by physically shaving, right? By shaving shows, I don't want to be a Nazir, or a relative shaved him, or he said something, Micha says, no, I object, I don't want to be a Nazir. Or one of his relatives says, no, he's not going to be a Nazir. When they hear immediately, they say that, then the Nazirut is cancelled. So this is equivalent case to a husband and wife, a father and son. Also, there are cases where the son himself or relatives can object to it. So he is a Nazir for some time, and then if he objects, he's not a Nazir anymore. So in such a case, if the father said, you're a Nazir. In the meantime, he set aside money. This will be consecrated money for my animals. And in the end, after a while, he objected or someone objected. So those funds, if they were not designated, so you use all the funds for voluntary offerings. Ma'ot meforashin demei hatat yelchu li'am hamelach. Demei ola yavi ola mo'alin bahem. Demei shalamim yavi shalamim v'nachelin yom echad v'enan teonin lechem. So, and the rest of it is all the same as in our Mishnah. If you designated the money for each thing, for that of the chatat, you throw into the Dead Sea. The money that was designated for Olah, buy an Olah, it's a regular Olah. You even have Me'elah if you take that money for yourself. And the money for Shalamim, you bring a Shalamim and only eat it for one day, like Nazir, and it doesn't need bread, unlike Nazir. Nazir needs bread, this one does not need bread. Okay, so that's the second case. Third case, Shelachal mita min elan. So what's your source for the one that is after death? The Tanya. המפריש מעות לנזירותו לא נהנין ולא מעלין בהן מפני שהן ראויין להביא בקולן שלמים. Someone designated money for his nizirut, and it didn't specify what offering it is, so you cannot benefit from that money, although there's no me'ilah with that money, because you can bring shelamim for any of them. There's no law for shelamim animal while it's alive, only after it sprinkles its blood. So since there's no problem, and this is just the money, so since there's no me'ilah for a live animal of a shelamim, so also there's no me'ilah for the money that you can use to buy a shelamim. Now, met, vayulo ma'ot setumim, the person that was a Nazir, before he got a chance to complete his Nazirut and bring his sacrifices, he died. And now you have the money that he already designated. If it was unspecified money, yipululin dava, so use it for regular communal offerings as gifts. Ma'ot meforash yipululin dava, use it for voluntary offerings. They'll be for the community. He died, so. You bring as just fillers like you do when the korban, when the mizbeach is empty, so you bring extra korbanot for dessert. Ma'ot meforashin, if they did designate it, then demei chatat yolich le'amamelach lo nenin velo ma'alin. Chatat, the money for chatat, you have to throw into the Dead Sea. You can't benefit from it. If you do benefit, there's no me'ilah. as we said before. The money for olah, bring a regular olah, that's fine. Umu'alin bahen, there is me'ilah for the korban olah, because you're going to take this, you're going to buy a regular olah, has all the laws of an olah. And here you go, here's the main part that we're looking for, that if the money for shilamim, you buy a shilamim offering, and it's like a Nazir in that the time period is small, but it's unlike a Nazir because you don't have to bring the bread. All right, that's the third case. And the fourth and final case, Shelachar kapara, Sivarahu, Shelachar mita, Mata'am, de la chazia lechapara, Shelachar kapara name, Ha la chazia lechapara. If a man who was a Nazir, he designated an animal, so this will be for Shilamim. But it turns out he already brought a different animal. Or after that, he brought a different animal for his shilamim, for his nizirut, so he already fulfilled his obligation to bring his animals for atonement. Atonement, a general term, meaning all the things that he had to do in order to complete his nizirut. So he already finished that, and now he has this animal that is extra. So what are you going to do with it? It has the same law as the one above. How do you know? There's no source, but it's reasonable. We just talked about someone after death. He designated an animal for shilamim as a Nazir, but then he died. What are you going to do with it? Oh, so as we said, you bring it as a shilamim with this in-between status. Now, what's the reason in that case? Because it cannot be used for atonement anymore. So because the person died, you can't atone for or complete the Nazir service for someone who died. He's not here. And so you use it instead for this type of shilamim. So same thing if he's alive, but he already fulfilled his obligation, his kapara, and now we don't need the shilamim for the nizirut anymore. It's not going to atone for anything. So it has the same status because it too is not atoning for anything. Therefore, it makes sense that you would bring it as a shilamim, and it would have the same status that it would be only for one day, like a nazir, but no bread, which a Nazir would have to bring. Okay, good. So there you go. We answered the question. Shmuel asked, right, what's going on here? What are these cases? These cases where you have this in between shelamim, and we have the answer, all the answers and all the explanations for each of them. But now we ask, Vetu leka? Hold on, that Braita said there's only four. Only four, not more? Here's another case where we have such a thing. Vayika ushar kol shalmei Nazir. ששחטן שלא כמצוותן כשרים ולא עולין לבעלים לשום חובה ונאכלים יום אחד ואינן טעונין לא לחם ולא זרוע. So if you have other shilamim of a Nazir, if a person did shechita, but there was something wrong. For example, the ram was not the right age that a Nazir has to bring. Now, this is a kosher animal, a kosher sacrifice, and you can go ahead and sprinkle the blood and on the mizbech and everything. It's a good shilamim. It's just that it can't be used for the Nazir. So they are kosher. However, the one who brought it does not fulfill his obligation. So now, what are you going to do with it? It's a shilamim, but it has the same in-between status. It's in only for one day, like a Nazir would, but it's not like a Nazir in that you don't have to bring the bread and also the foreleg. That's also something that only the shalamim of a Nazir has to give to the Kohen and not regular shalamim. So in these aspects, this is a new thing that we're mentioning now, in these aspects, this is like a regular shalamim and not like the shelamim of a Nazir. So how come you didn't bring this one also in your list and should be 5? And the answer is Kimisvatan kahasheb, shalom misvatan kemasvetan la kahasheb. In that baraita, we're only bringing animals, rams that were sacrificed in the proper procedure as a regular Nazir shalamim would be brought. Those are the 4 cases. We're not talking about cases where you messed up and you did it some wrong way, and then you ended up with a situation that it would also be the same. But you're right. This would be a 5th example. Just that the Braita wanted to pick examples where everything was done correctly. In accordance with the proper procedure, but because the person who brought it no longer requires it, that's why it ended up this way. And so this has the same result, but for a different reason, and that's why it's not included in the Braita. Amen ve'amen.